We are very glad that that all of you are here today, and we have received we're about 300 that have registered for this event. Some are on the other side of the Atlantic, so we have decided to record this webinar and make it available afterwards on the POPFREE website. So you will be able to see this afterwards, and also look at the presentations after this webinar as well. The aim with this webinar is to release the PFAS substitution guide for textile supply chains. And this is a document that has been developed within the project. It is available for download on the POPFREE website and using the link below. We will send out the link beginning of next week, together with the link to the recordings of the presentations. Another aim of this webinar is to present activities, results, and learnings from the POPFREE textile case. And a third aim is to encourage communication and collaboration within the supply chains regarding substitution of PFAS. And here we are very glad that we do have people representative from different parts of the textile supply chain, such as fabric producers and finishers, garment or product garment assembly organizations, and also several different brands. So we're very glad that we do have this supply chain covering or being present at this webinar. So very, very welcome to all of you. The agenda for today is that we do have 2 hours, and we will start with the PFAS substitution guide, where the first presentation will be focusing more on background aspects, such as what is PFAS, why are they a concern, and also potential uses in the textile supply chain. The second presentation will cover more practical use of the guide. And then our POPFREE partners will present the PFAS phase-out journey from a brand perspective. So we have Houdini and Bergans that will present sort of their work when it comes to PFAS substitution. And then OrganoClick will present their work when it comes to development of DVR guided by sustainability criteria. We will then give you some more interesting information and also address new possibilities for collaboration. We want you to ask questions and write them to Joel, targeted questions to Joel in the chat. And we will, if time allows, ask a couple of questions after each of the presentations, and then we will end with a Q&A session. Some questions after the presentations, and then we will have more questions in the end. Recommendation for when you're is to choose side-by-side view in the Zoom menu on the top, so that you can see both the slides and the presenters, if you have not done that already. POPFREE aims at a systemic change where PFAS-free products are the natural choice, both for producers and consumers. And for this to happen, new products need to reach the market, and awareness needs to be increased so that both industry and consumers understand why PFAS should be avoided. And this is especially needed before a broad PFAS regulation enters into force, when there may be both PFAS containing and PFAS-free products on the market. So in the POPFREE project, we have been working with development, testing, and risk assessment of alternatives in 6 different product cases. And focus now in the last phase of the project, stage 3, has been on film forming products and textile impregnation. And the legislation aspect is of course also important, and we have seen that legislation will boost innovation even further. But those 3 together could make this systemic change. In the POPFREE textile case, focus has been on further development and upscaling of bio-based DVR, and this has been OrganoClick's work, to be tested in textile mills in collaboration with brands and their suppliers. We know that there are many commercially available products on the market, but focus in this project has been more on production and development of even more sustainable products. Another important aspect in the case is communication about alternatives and PFAS substitution in general. And for that, we have developed this PFAS substitution guide that we will, that is sort of focus in this webinar. So with that, I hope that you all feel very welcome, and we will continue with the first presentation. And I will talk about what PFAS is, concerns, and potential uses in textile supply chains. PFAS stands for per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances, and this is sort of the general term that is used now. Previous wordings for this substance group has been fluorocarbons, PFCs, highly fluorinated substances, perfluorinated substances, but now the general term is PFAS. There are many different types of PFAS substances that are all industrially synthesized. They don't exist naturally in nature. According to OECD definition, there is a new one from 2021 that says that a PFAS substance is a molecule that contains at least one poly or perfluorinated alkyl group. And basically this means that you have this carbon chain with fluorine bond to the carbon. So either you have 2 fluorine bond to the carbon or 3. So this is a PFAS, and this is the most common PFAS, PFOA, which is now regulated. But this carbon-fluorine bond is the strongest bond in organic chemistry, and this is what gives rise to the extreme persistence that we see in this group of chemicals. And it's also this strong bond that also gives rise to very unique properties that are very wanted in many different types of products. So you are not supposed to see or read sort of what's on this figure, but this is to show you that this group is extremely complex. There are many different types of PFAS substances. There are large, small molecules, charged, uncharged, just a very large group of chemicals, and you're not supposed, no one knows all of these letters and numbers. But you should know that there are very many different PFAS substances with different structures and properties. And these means that they behave differently in nature and in the human body. You should also know that there are polymeric PFAS, such as PTFE. So PTFE and fluoropolymers are also considered PFAS. And what all of these substances have in common are that they are persistent. So they do not degrade in the environment, or they degrade to other PFAS substances that are even more, maybe more stable. So they do possess very unique functions due to that there are very strong the strong bond, and also that this fluorinated substances don't like to interact with any other type of molecule. And this gives rise to water repellency, oil and dirt repellency, film forming properties, high thermal stability, and also low friction and non-stick properties. I would say that the same performance will be hard to achieve with other chemistries because these are so unique, and we should be prepared to accept lower performance and a change to mindset. So why are these problematic? As I said, they are very persistent and do not degrade in nature. Some are mobile and transports easily through air and water. They do pollute soil and water. They don't break down easily and stay there. Some bioaccumulate in plants, animals, and humans, and also like the smaller PFAS substances that have been replaced, PFOA and longer chain PFAS seem to be maybe more easily accumulated in plants, for example. We do see concentration higher up in the food chain, and that's called biomagnification. And it's also related to the persistency. They are very thermally stable, so they are not necessarily destroyed in the waste treatments during incineration. There's a lot of unknowns and gaps, knowledge gaps when it comes to waste treatment of PFAS containing products. And studied PFAS have shown a variety of health effects on humans and animals. This is a summary of sort of both effects or health risk of more high certainty and lower certainty. And this is also included in the guide. But sort of one of the main concerns is the developmental risks and sort of how we are affecting the next generation. And immunotoxicity is also another main concern, and reduced response to vaccines. Other effects or risks with higher certainty are kidney cancer, testicular cancer, liver damage, and also effects on the cardiovascular system. But it should be noted that there are only a few PFAS substances that have been studied in detail. It takes a very long time, and it's very challenging to study effects on humans of a single chemical substance. What's unique with these PFAS substances compared to other pollutants is that they bind to proteins and not necessarily, and not the fat tissue, and distributes to the different tissues in the body through the blood. And PFAS can be transferred to the fetus via the placenta and to infants through breastfeeding or during breastfeeding. The main reason why we do have PFAS in us or in the blood is that is through the exposure through the food that we eat and the water that we drink. And the reason for us for having PFAS in the food and in the drinking water is that PFAS has been released into the environment during production, during end of life, when a product has been used and is not used anymore and you throw it away, and also to some extent during the use phase. But what is important here is to consider the life cycle aspect of a product, and not only the safety when it comes to the consumer using the product, but also consider emissions to the environment during production and end of life. And the continuous release of these chemicals in the environment leads to increasing probabilities of both known and unknown effects. This is a quite recent publication that has received quite a lot of interest in media, where they have measured, in this case, 4 different PFAS substances, and they find it in the rainwater all over the globe. And the levels are higher than the recommended drinking water levels. So this is just to sort of show that what is released into the environment affects, the water is sort of transferred to the environment. So due to that, there is impossible to evaluate PFAS substance by substance. It takes extremely long time. And due to that, these PFAS substances have similar properties that are worrying, and also to avoid regrettable substitution, that you take, you remove one PFAS substance that is regulated and replace it with another PFAS compound. And to avoid that, there is now a working group with, that sort of drafts a proposal to regulate PFAS as a group. And this is done by 5 European countries in collaboration. This dossier is to be submitted to ECHA in January 2023, with a possible decision by the European Commission in 2025. And there's a lot of talk about essential uses, which was addressed in this EU chemical strategy. And there's a lot of ongoing work about what that means and what is essential, etc. But the basic definition in the chemical strategy was necessary for health and safety and critical for society. And if there are no technically, economically available alternatives. So there's a lot of ongoing work, and most probably there will be a broad regulation of PFAS in many different types of product categories. So when it comes to textiles, the most it's basically the durable water repellent finish that has a lot of work has been ongoing on finding PFAS-free alternatives, PFAS-free product when it comes to DVR. And there are many different types of commercially available DVR on the market. But then there might be more unknown uses of PFAS in the textile supply chain that should also be considered. We do have the membranes in waterproof breathable garments. There, we may have PFAS. There may be PFAS in trims and details, for example, zippers or other tools or other details that should be waterproof. Yarns may be coated with some PFAS to make it more water resistant. Process chemicals and process auxiliaries for wetting and improving the quality of the coatings is also a possible source of PFAS. And then we have the re-impregnation products for home use and the washing treatments also for home use that may contain PFAS, so the aftercare. And then there is also a risk for contamination in the factory if the same production line is used for applying both PFAS containing and PFAS-free DVR on fabrics. So here we encourage, and I think it's hard to know if you have it or not. So here we recommend that you ask questions and that you collaborate to find possible hidden uses of PFAS. If we look at the life cycle for textile DVRs, there are many potential human exposure steps or stages, and diffuse spreading to the surrounding ecosystems can basically happen in each life cycle step. So it's good to be aware of this and to really try to decrease this exposure and potential spreading of PFAS in the and other chemicals for that matter also in the environment. I want to highlight also the end of use. As I said before, there's a lot that we don't know about what is happening to the PFAS when the product becomes waste. Do we break down the PFAS or not? So there's a lot of ongoing research and a lot of unknowns when it comes to the waste aspect. This is the final slide, and I think both in POPFREE stage 2 and now in stage 3, where we know and we have learned that there is no universal solution for fabrics. So it's really to obtain the optimal DVR performance, it's really about combining and optimizing the fabric chemistry, and we know that impurities do affect the performance. The fabric structure is very important, and we will come back to that later. The formulation chemistry, what's in the formulation, how that wets the fibers and the surface, etc. And also how the product or the DVR is applied. So there are many different, so all this have to play together. And here we think that collaboration between chemical supplier, fabric producer, textile finishing mill, garment vendor, and the retailer is very favorable. And especially when you test new products and try to optimize their performance. So all the focus may look like it's sort of outdoor. We still think that sort of the knowledge about PFAS and sort of how you can use the guide and how you become more aware about chemicals in your supply chain, it's could be applicable to many different organizations and stakeholders. And with that, thank you. Any questions, Joel?
I had one question which I answered in the chat immediately. It was about other uses than textile.
So maybe we can take that so that everybody here. So yeah. Textiles is one of many applications where PFAS traditionally have been used, but we have non-stick kitchenware, we have like electronics, we have food contact paper, firefighting foam, ski wax, cosmetics, and yeah, so many different types of products, but there is a lot of ongoing work and has been a lot of ongoing work to really find substitute for PFAS in these product categories.
Yeah, so then I have had a couple of questions or rather comments on it. One is, it's now 24 years ago, there was this really big health case regarding PFAS with PFOA in Parkersburg, West Virginia in the US, where DuPont had released a lot of PFOA in the water around Parkersburg. There is a movie concerning this issue, which is really good. It was on Swedish Channel 8 yesterday evening, so I got a refresher on that issue just now. I'll post the link now. Thanks, Henrik, for sharing it. and you can check out the movie. It's a really good case if you want to really understand the magnitude of the issue. Please see it. So yeah, and I also got now a really good question from Tone, asking about how to, as she said, unravel this theme in lay form for ordinary people, how to explain it to everyone. And this is a really tricky issue. There are a lot of good efforts if you look to the NGOs, different NGOs. You can go to Greenpeace or you can go to your national NGOs. Almost any NGO in sort of in the world concerning environmental issues has something about PFAS. And also, of course, our authorities on chemistry often has something, but they are generally more directed to the persons in industry trying to work with it. But if you go to consumer organizations or environmental organizations, there's generally very good information about PFAS.
And we are also trying now, as this is sort of one way of trying to talk about this chemistry group and the concerns.
Yeah. I also got a question about regulation from Liam, asking, is it being regulated across all industries or just textile outdoor?
No, it's this broad PFAS restriction will be covering all type of products. Yeah. So it's not just textiles, it's everything. But then there may be some sort of exemptions due to what they then define or consider to be essential. But even though you would have something being thought of as essential, it's not that you will have that forever. So then you would still have to need to work on finding and developing substitutes during sort of that time. So I would say it's really everybody that is affected. Yeah,
affected by it. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So I leave the word to you. I think you will.
Thank you. I will share my screen. See if we can find it. There. Does it show? Okay. So regarding this sort of how to make it simpler, this is more, of course, towards the industrial use and towards the professional users, but still finding a way to communicate this to people who are not chemists themselves, because I think that's the biggest issue right now, is that all the people that are using PFAS in a professional way are not chemists. Most of the persons buying these solutions are either engineers or designers or just trying to make a product work in different ways. And they are often applied by non-chemists as well in the textile mills or in other industries as well, of course. So I will go through the guide we have made, which is launched today and which is available on the website, with a few highlights of the guide and what's in it. You can, of course, download it directly after this. So let's move on with that. The guide consists of two different parts. So depending on where you are, we have a lot of people in this. I guess some of you are quite new to it, but many of you have been in this dialogue and discussion many times before. So if you're really new to it, you should start with part one. That's the introduction with sort of what is substitution, how do you work with substituting PFAS? What is sort of the textile connection to PFAS in a sort of broad context, and showing the life cycle in textiles, which you could see in Lisa's illustrations as well. And then we have a toolkit for chemical investigations, which I will go through as well. The part 2 is more sort of trying to translate current science about PFAS into something which is usable for most people in industry. So we will go through the basics of PFAS a bit deeper than the introduction. We have health environment aspects, a part of that. A lot about alternatives and how to find them and how to assess them. Also the unknown uses, the regulation. I saw some questions about regulation. We will take them later. There is a lot of regulation information in this document, both on EU level and on international level. So you can find a lot of links to different parts of the regulation around PFAS there. And also we have a more general part with chemicals management tools, which we think are very relevant here. If you're going to take control over your chemical flows, it doesn't only entail PFAS. It's almost always that if you need control over PFAS and don't feel that you have it, you also need control over a lot of other chemicals. So going through, I will not go through the whole guide because then you won't have anything to read. So I will take a few highlights from it and show you what's in it and how it can be usable. So I will take these one by one, starting with the toolkit for chemical investigations. This is something that many of you have already been through, trying to unravel what is actually in your products. And this is sort of a step-by-step approach where you start with identifying things internally in your company. What type of functions have we specified? What can be in the materials, and where are the PFAS needed? And then start investigate the used chemicals with the suppliers, asking questions, requesting documentation, and so on. The thing which comes next is one that I find sort of the most challenging. That's when you get the responses to your questions, often they do not tell the whole story. And that's how to follow up those responses and how to get deeper into it. And then we have a fourth step, which is investigation tactics, on showing a little bit more about how you can get deeper and make a broader investigation. So I'll quickly go through step 3 here with the responses and follow-ups. Because what we have seen, I've been working as a sustainability manager myself in textile company and asking these questions. That's sometimes when you ask these questions, you get true nonsense replies. But they can vary in a degree of sense and nonsense. Sometimes you get really good responses, which are not granular enough. Sometimes you get responses that you're really worried about, are they even correct? So we have set up 9 levels of chemistry statements or responses you can get to a question, and possible follow-up questions. And these 9 levels are sort of more and more granular, so you can work your way through this list to get to the bottom of things. Of course, you might end up on a mid-level, but you will always get more information if you ask the follow-up questions. Then is the case of uncertainty, because you will almost never get all the information. And there are a couple of things that can be done often in how you're managing chemicals. The first one is who is actually in charge of managing chemicals in your company. We see in many companies, you do not have an appointed selected person who does it. It's like, well, the designer does some, and the engineers do some of it, and so on. But really, to get to the bottom of it, you need someone who is on top of knowing the regulation, knowing how to manage these investigation tactics, and can help you out with it. Sometimes they are internal in your company, sometimes you need it externally, someone who really offers that knowledge and lets you know how to do it. There are always some publicly available information around every chemical formulation in the safety data sheets. The challenge here is, though, that PFAS are often missing in the safety data sheets. So even if you get the safety data sheets, it doesn't mean that you get all the information about PFAS. And there are two main reasons for this. The first one is that, as Lisa have already said, most PFAS are not restricted or categorized in the legal framework yet. That means that they are not obliged to give them to you. And the second thing is that PFAS are very efficient chemicals, and to get the functionality you need from, you often need very low concentrations. And that means that in most regulation frameworks, there is a sort of a threshold limit of 1% or 0.1% that you have to disclose. And the limits of using PFAS are often much lower than that. So it means that you can have the content of PFAS in there, but they are not obliged to tell you that it is there. So that is one thing that you really need to be wary of, and you have to have tactics of how to get through that barrier. Then it's the PFAS-free alternatives, and in textiles there are sort of generally speaking 4 different main categories of alternatives which are available. We list them in the guide with a lot of examples and how to understand these categories better. They are not without sort of risks themselves, so you need to assess the risks in each category by itself and understand how they work. And there is a warning too, because we say PFAS-free. We see that many companies have labeled things PFOS or PFOA-free. This does not mean PFAS-free. It only means free of PFOS or PFOA substances. So that's a small subset of PFAS. So when you see something which is PFOA-free, it can still contain other PFAS. And you need to investigate further on knowing what PFAS they are, what are the hazards of them, and how do you substitute them if you want to go further than the legislation. And when it comes to PFAS-free, I mentioned that the alternatives also have risks. So one example is turning to silicone-based DWRs. Many of these silicone-based are produced using siloxanes D4, D5, and D6. And these are actually recommended for restriction by the European Chemicals Agency today. So they're not yet fully restricted, but they are in the restriction dossiers. So we know that they will end up there. So if you would substitute a PFAS towards these, you might face another substitution in a couple of years. So this is very important to understand. Then I talked about chemicals management and trying to find your tools to get on top of all chemistry in your products. There are watch lists for future regulation, which I just talked about the silicone case. If you have sort of a check on these watch lists, you know also what to not substitute to if you want to be ahead of the game. And of course, to really know for sure what's in the product, you cannot only ask questions, you also might need to do analytical testing to be certain that there are no impurities or other chemistry who has gotten into your products without you knowing. I got a question which I can take in this. That's PFC-free. Is that meaning PFAS-free? Generally, yes. PFC-free means the same thing. PFC is an old abbreviation of the same thing as PFAS, but it's not used in, if you talk scientifically today, then you talk about PFAS. But in many industries, you still talk about PFC, and that means the same thing. But from a science point of view, it's not correct. And then we have one of the bigger challenges when trying to totally eliminate PFAS, and that's the unknown uses. We have a couple of pages in the guide of trying to find these, the sort of investigation tactics to find these unknown uses, and that goes to the functionality and where it could be used in the industry, and starting asking questions about that. When it comes to the general chemicals management and how to sort of set up a framework around this, there are a lot of different tools, such as really sort of granular chemical inventories, but you also can use with restriction lists and regulatory lists. There are certifications and standards that are used for textiles that can sort of rule out PFAS as well. So if you're certified to that standard, then they have to make sure that PFAS is not a part of your product. So there are a lot of ways. They're in the guide, you can find them there. So please read it and make sure that you find your way forward. And then we have a bonus which gives a starting point to those who haven't found their way yet in substituting PFAS in textiles. We have a very short list of a couple of hazard assessed formulations of DWR which are PFAS-free. It has been compiled together with a big textile and footwear brand, so they have sort of assessed these themselves, and we have done a couple of editions from the POPFREE project, or OrganoClick, for example, which are a part of the project, are in here too. It will be downloadable within a month. We are right now doing the graphics on it, so it's in the works. So that's sort of the next bit if you're really looking into it. And also, of course, there are a couple of other lists around there, and there are links to those lists as well. So this is only a starter list, and there are many more PFAS-free solutions in textiles today. So that is my part about the guide for today. Now let's see if we have any questions. I think there are a lot of them.
I received one question about testing, and we will talk a little bit about testing in the end. So we skip that question for now.
Yeah, and I have a couple of them, so I can
maybe take one now, and then we save for the end.
So will you talk about the legislation more, Lisa?
No, not.
No. Then we can take it here. Will you tell us about the recent announcement from EU that they plan to ban all PFAS as part of the chemical strategy? That European Environmental Bureau expect all PFAS to be illegal in the EU by 2030. That's from Casper.
Yes, and I think we mentioned that earlier, that there is ongoing work in sort of writing this proposal up, and this proposal will be submitted in January 2023, and then we will see sort of how it is written.
Yeah.
But a broad restriction is on its way.
Yeah. I can also take this short from Dan. If there is a PFAS-free label, I mean, there are many companies labeling their products PFAS-free today. There is no sort of official third-party label saying PFAS-free. But there are a lot of different labels and certifications which do not allow PFAS. So, for example, we got the question about the Nordic Swan. That's one of them. So it's working like that. And there are a couple of others also in textile and in other industries. So there are ways to certify PFAS-free, but it doesn't say PFAS-free on the label.
I got a question here related to that. Yep. About the blue sign.
Yep.
And sort of how PFAS is covered there.
Yep. Blue sign has taken a best available technology approach, meaning that they generally are a couple of steps ahead of the legislation. And frankly speaking, I don't know if they are fully PFAS-free today. I know that when I worked intensely with this in the brands, then they were not. They ruled out the C8s first and had short chain in their library of potential substances to use. So if they have gone totally PFAS-free today, I'm not sure. That needs to be checked.
I think we thank you, Joel.
Yep,
and we leave the word to Houdini.
Yep.